I'm here today with Bekah McNeel. Bekah is the author of a new book titled Bringing Up Kids When Church Lets You Down, a guide for parents questioning their faith, published by Erdman's. Bekah is a journalist, wife, and mother of two. Her work has appeared in Christianity Today, Sojourners, Relevant, the Texas Tribune, ESPN's The Undefeated, the Christian Science Monitor, Texas Public Radio, and elsewhere. Bekah is a graduate of the London School of Economics, where she earned an MSc in Media Studies. Woohoo! In addition to pieces about parenting, she writes about education, immigration, and faith communities, as well as the occasional op-ed calling on the American Evangelical Church to lay down its idols of white supremacy and patriarchy. Amen. You can learn more at BekahMcNeel.com, and that's spelled BekahMcNeel.com. So Bekah, thanks so much for joining us, and it's just such a pleasure to meet you.
It's so fun to be here. I love talking about writing.
Well, beyond just writing, I mean, all the other topics that you deal with that are very important in your book are, just outstanding for us to have a conversation around. So I'm really glad that we got introduced and that, we have a chance to spend some time together here. So maybe to get started, what can you tell us that I didn't catch on that you want people to know about
you? Well, that bio, I feel like, has grown up with me. And so it really does catch some of the important parts. I think an important thing to know is just how process oriented my writing is, just how much I get into the internal personal work of struggling through topics, not just how to put them into words, but how to there's therapy, there's journaling, there's a lot of prayer, there's a lot of self-inquiry that goes into like almost every sentence. And so
wow.
My editors and my family members would definitely call it almost an obsession. But I have I really see writing as kind of the culmination of the resolution of tension. And so a lot of my life is building that tension. So I'm not a lot of fun at parties.
I can't see that, but in any event, so tell us more about your background. You're from San Antonio, I know.
I am born and raised in Texas, went away for school, but came back, fell in love, got stuck. Just kidding. It's great. San Antonio is wonderful. And I grew up in the PCA, the Presbyterian Church in America, which is like the very, very conservative branch of Presbyterianism.
Okay.
And in Texas, it has a very fundamentalist flavor, kind of mixes with like an old time religion, sort of nostalgia. My pastor had a Confederate flag hanging over his desk for most of my childhood.
Wow.
Yeah. And I went to Christian schools for like high school, and I really just grew up in kind of this very, very rigid, very, very prescriptive expression of faith. And then it feels like spent most of my 20s and 30s kind of climbing out of it. And finding a lot more freedom, and then having kids and realizing like, oh my goodness, this incredible opportunity to give you something different, something more free, something more secure, something more oriented around belonging and knowing that you're beloved. But I have to do that. And to do that, I'm going to have to find that for myself. And so I label it growing up with my kids in some like social media campaigns and stuff, is that I'm learning this alongside them. And so that's my story, is really kind of almost being like starting over with emotional and spiritual development in my 20s.
Well, I mean, as I mentioned, the title of the book is Bringing Up Kids When Church Lets You Down, a guide for parents questioning faith. I mean, that sounds like the story of your life, more or less.
It is. This was that book that, everybody has the low hanging fruit of my life. It's all the research was done. Started writing the book when I was 36. So I had 36 years of research to pull from. But also I've been a journalist for 10 years. And so I had, the experience and the know-how to do like the journalistic part, talk to people, gather their stories. So, but it was the whole reason the book was written was because so many of us are living not the same story, not by any means, but stories with enough similarity that we needed to find each other and we needed to look to each other and start to learn how to listen to each other, because we weren't able to listen to those old voices of authority anymore, because they'd really led us to a place of hurt and disgust. And so finding each other, like journalism helps me find stories, but also, it's my own life story as well in there. And it's not told chronologically or anything. It's not a memoir, but there are memoir elements that are relevant to the different topics. It's divided topically. We felt like that was really would be most helpful for people.
Yeah, I want to get to that in a minute because I think it was a very interesting organization structure. But so it sounds like, the book is kind of intended for other people that are going through a similar situation that you went through.
Yeah, the target audience for sure is parents who are either have deconstructed or are starting to deconstruct, but are going, oh, what do I do about discipline? What do I do about church? Do I, if they don't go to church, are they going to not have any faith at all? Because I was told I had to get that at church. And basically, what do I do about the Bible? Do I teach them that the earth was created in 7 days like I was taught because that's easier to understand? Or what do I do? So it's definitely for those folks. But there are other audiences that I hope get something out of it. And what I've heard from some friends who read it because they love me, not because they're in this target audience, friends who either are perfectly happy in the faith that they grew up in or have never been part of any, religion or whatever. And they have said, this is helping me understand the people around me. So it's helping a lot of people who are in churches understand the people who are leaving church. There's a lot of hurt and confusion there, I think. There's been this backlash against deconstructing where people are saying like, oh, these people are trying to lead you astray. So now we have another, us-them divide that the church is cultivating, which is awesome, helpful. But because we need more. So it's for my friends who have always found Christianity in particular to be a really edifying, secure place. This is helping them understand what people are upset about, why people they know are saying like, I'm walking away. Because not everybody's ready to tell that story, and certainly not to like casual acquaintances at church. And so I've heard from some people that like reading more about the broader phenomenon is helping them understand, oh, okay, here are some of the forces pulling on people. And it may not be exactly what their acquaintance or their friend is going through, but it's helpful. And then the other people who are like, what is up with these people? Why is my boss at work so like obsessed with hierarchy and authority and stuff? We have an open office plan. It's supposed to be like a flat hierarchy, but my boss seems to be like really obsessed with authority. If they grew up in an evangelical world, that's understandable. And I have a friend who married into an evangelical family, and she's like, I understand my in-laws now. So it's helpful. I think it's as much about the cultural moment as it is about parenting inside of it.
So the book is divided into three main sections. The first explores the reasons people struggle with faith and the cost of perfectionist faith and parenting. The second is about what happened in evangelical Christianity that caused so many people to be hurt and disillusioned. And the third is how our shifts in faith affect parenting decisions and unexpected parenting issues that arise. So let's talk about each one of those, starting with the cost of perfection.
Oy. Yeah. So I use the analogy throughout, like the sections are named the icy road, exit ramps, and forks in the road. So I kind of build off this analogy of a mountain, that we're all climbing this mountain of perfectionism. And we have a culture that tells us being on this mountain and constantly striving upward, constantly trying to do better, do more, perform better, perform more, is how, that's just the way to live, really, is to constantly be trying to get up this mountain. And I visualize it as this icy road, and I'm in the car with my kids and I'm gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles, and how miserable that makes parenting, how everything your kids do feels like a threat, because what if they're sinning? What if they're doing bad? What if they end up not succeeding? And you see it in both, general culture. You see the parenting rat race, and you see it in this fundamentalist religious culture that's very, very concerned with whether or not they have sex, whether or not they do drugs, that kind of thing, whether or not they know Bible verses. So you see these two, and then you realize, like, those are awfully similar. They both have this very perfectionistic streak where it's constantly trying to be better and holier and more pure. We're constantly trying to be more successful, get more accomplished, etc. And what I did is kind of trace back, like, actually, these are from very similar roots in the United States, especially, but throughout Christian empire, there is a connection between our economic, political goals and religious goals. Those have been brought together. There has been a partnership between everything from colonizing with missions to churches supporting certain candidates, being pro-family, but also anti-taxes. So there's always been this collusion, if you will. And I spend a lot of time talking about how that together has built this culture that we're stuck in. And then how people like James Dobson come along and say, I can make sure that you're parenting in accordance with these values, because you need to be training up the next generation. And parents are a very useful group for politicians, because they're afraid of what's going to happen to their kids. They'll buy anything if you say it'll help their kids and protect their kids and make their kids smarter and stronger and faster and whatever. And so this very kind of malleable group gets special attention inside of a political system, an economic system, and then a religious system, on how to do this a certain way to accomplish certain ends. And so that's the icy road. Now, I think what spurred this book, and I think made the cultural moment that allowed it to happen, was the Trump administration. I think that is where that icy road started to look a lot less appealing. I think people started to kind of see it for what it was. And you start to see people asking questions about this. Why are these things so similar? Why is our church so supportive of this guy? You start to see defensiveness on the other side, so that your doubts are met with even more pushback. People have long had the experience that when they express a doubt, they get kind of exiled or red flagged, but it was happening more and more. There was you need to get on board thing that was happening more intensely, because this guy was harder to support. And so they had to double down harder. And I think a lot of people reached a point that they'd never reached before where somebody was telling them to choose. And that pressure came from people who were opposed to Trump saying, I'm sorry, you can't sort of be half in, half out on this. And it also came from people who were supportive of this whole system, this whole icy road system, saying, now's the moment we need you to really declare your allegiance. And I think a lot of people just chose to
Mm-hmm.
leave
Mm-hmm.
because there were so many things that were suddenly indefensible.
Mm-hmm.
And I argue that they've always been there. They've just been in a more polite or more socially acceptable form, but they kind of really blossomed
Yeah,
in
it
the
can't
Trump
brought things to
administration.
a head, a forcing function, you know, kind of
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah. And I was recently with some of my family is in Europe, and I was with them, and they were like, man, I hadn't seen them since before Trump because of the pandemic and all that happening so soon after. And they were just like, it seems to have really taken a toll on, from the outside looking in, you guys look pretty battered. And I was like, yeah, I think we feel pretty battered. I think institutions, families have all felt it. So those are the exit ramps. And I talk about,
Yeah, so let's go to the second section.
yeah,
What in that, what do you say about what happened with evangelical Christianity that caused so many people to be hurt and disillusioned?
right. Well, so I basically go to the different things that come up for people that they either say, okay, this is either like intellectually untenable, or this is so hurtful and gross that I can't be part of it. So I talk about the doctrine of hell. I talk about the authority of the Bible, like interpreting the Bible literally, politics, race, the construction of the family, saying families have to be a certain way, and anti-intellectualism, the belief that the academy is like the big enemy of faith. And so each of those I discuss, like what happened
Hmm.
that pushed people to a decision point, and then looked at people who took that exit and what are they doing now? What alternative have they found? Like if that was their issue, where did they end up? And let less in the Bible and hell chapters, because those are really more of a theological discussion of like, if you come to the point where you can't believe in eternal conscious torment or an inerrant scripture, like you are not alone in Christianity. That's all there is to say. Like you don't have to believe in those things. And so that's the whole point. But then also, what's the question behind the question for your kids there? Like,
Yeah.
is it about hell, or is it about what do we do with bad? What do we do with the bad that we do? What do we do with the bad that's done to us? Because that's what I wanted to get to, is like behind politics, it's about power. Behind race, it's power again, but it's about the
Mm-hmm.
creation of the other. Behind anti-intellectualism, it's about fear. And so that whole section is just about the specific issues that kept coming up over and over and over again when I would talk to people.
Wow. Wow. So let's move on to the third section then. What do you say about how our shifts in faith affect parenting?
Well, so, and that's what I'd call, that's the forks in the road section. So you've gotten off the icy road, taken your exit ramp, and then you come to a decision that needs to be made in parenting. And that decision, you didn't think of it as a faith-based decision. You didn't think of this as being something that your church told you you had to do a certain thing. But it turns out that when your faith started to shift, this was like a ripple effect. So I talk about discipline. Now, for some of us, for people who grew up in the James Dobson area, discipline actually was a spiritual issue. Spanking was God's way, and seeing the parent-child relationship as inherently antagonistic or a battle was something that was taught by spiritual leaders, and submission to authority, obedience wasn't a virtue, a standalone virtue. It was the most important virtue. And I still see parents talking about that. Like all being obedient is the number one thing. It doesn't matter whether I'm right or wrong. You being obedient is the important part. And I think that has really stunted a lot of adults who now have to make our own decisions and never developed that ability because we just waited for someone to tell us what to do.
Wow.
So discipline was one. And then schools, picking a school, because we were taught that the school was a dangerous place full of bad influences, whether it was the secular state or, bad kids who didn't share our values, all that coded language. It's often very racist. And so I talk about schools and whether or not you go to church, like what you do with your Sunday morning. And my mind just blanked on the other one. There's one more. That's so funny. I've talked about this a bajillion times and every now and then. Oh, how you talk to your kids about sex. So in the first section, we talk about how the church's unwillingness to consider anything other than a man and a woman who share the same faith and are monogamously married that's the only structure of a family that we'll accept. And then the sex talks is like, even if you've taken that exit ramp, even if you said, I believe that families can look a bunch of different ways, you still have to at some point talk to your kid about their sexuality. And parents go, okay, even though I want to be sex positive and it's okay if you're queer, it's okay if you'd never want to get married, it's okay, I still am feeling very awkward about talking to you about sex. And what do I want to like, what are the values that I want to give you? Because I don't want to leave you like to flounder on this issue. And there are ethics and there are principles that our family has. And so it talks about that. And then the conclusion is just a little micro look into one decision that we had to make.
So before we started the interview, you talked about this phenomenon of a lot of people that, have left the whole culture of their church and walk outside and they don't know what to do. They don't know where to go. They don't know what to look for or where to find a new sense of belonging. What kind of advice do you give for those folks?
Yeah, I think that the best advice is to just be very patient and very open-handed with yourself, because everyone I talked to talks about like being miscalibrated, like your decision making has been messed with your entire life. And so you can't necessarily walk out. I quickly identify, oh, that's what I want to be a part of. That's what I want to believe. That's who I'm going to join up with. I compared it to when we were talking, and I have compared it to this often. You're walking out of a huge old institutional church building, like one of those big classic center of town churches, onto a street fair where there's just tons of little booths set up. And, one guy's doing yoga, another guy's selling records. Some of these people are kind of mean, but it feels good because they're poking fun at the people you don't like. Others are like very accepting of everything and everyone, and there's no rules. And that kind of is freaking you out because you just came from a lot of rules. And, some people are on mushrooms, literally. It's, the whole street fair is intoxicating and wonderful, but it's not necessarily where you want to be like, oh yeah, these are definitely my people the minute you run out of church, because you have some thinking. You have to learn how to think. You have to learn how to find people. You have to learn more about yourself. And so I think that's the purpose of that street fair, is just to kind of wander and try things and look for things until you find, okay, this is actually something that fits this is something that has stuck around with me for a while. This rings true, your spirit resonates with it. And over time you find that it is life-giving. And I think at that point, and this is where I think we are, and it's a really challenging time because I don't think much, some things, but not much, has come together in a way to provide community around those things, because that's what most people are missing the most, is a group of people who, even if I can't carry the ball forward today, on the days when I am just not very useful, who still love me and I'm still a part of them and I'm still a part of something that's happening. I don't have to be the person to take the meal to, the person who's sick. I can be a part of a system that does that, and I'll do it next time. And somebody will do it for me. And, I don't have to give $3,000 to the family who needs a new car, but we can pool our money and do that. So I think that there's real good that comes from people being together and in community, and in small, nimble ways that are more nimble than government. I'm a big fan of paying your taxes, but there is also a benefit to us being able to person on person meet the needs and spiritually encourage each other. And where I think I don't have an answer, and this book is kind of written in search of that answer, and a lot of the people in the book are searching for the answer, is what's on the other side of the street. Like, once we've gotten through the street fair, what's being built on the other side where I can go back day after day and it's still there and it's stable and there's other people there and we can start to build trust and we can, have community there. And that is spiritual community. I think that is probably the hunger that many people have right now.
So I know you're right in the middle of launching a whole new book, but are there any future projects that you can talk about yet at this point?
I can.
Good.
I have, right before the launch date of Bringing Up Kids, I signed for a second book with Erdman's. And this one is going to be about how our view of what suffering is intolerable and what suffering is tolerable shapes our position on social issues.
Wow. That's
very
serious.
Yeah. And the funny part was, I hope they don't mind me telling this. I'm going to tell this story often because it was a hilarious moment. Bringing Up Kids is funny. Like, it has a lot of sarcasm and self-deprecation and kind of sardonic little punches here and there. And the editors were like, so do you think this one will have the same tone? And I was like, you want to know if my suffering book is going to be funny? And they said, yes. And so I'm hoping it will. I'm hoping that there's enough punching up that can be done that it'll still be humorous. But it is going to be a very serious look, because as a journalist, I was reporting on abortion and on critical race theory, quote unquote, critical race theory, and immigration. And I was hearing all of these amazing, gut-wrenching, harrowing stories of suffering, and then watching them kind of fall on deaf ears and seeing the way people responded to them and how they processed the suffering of someone who was other, and in a way that kept them from having to change or prevented them from having to suffer themselves. And so I thought, there's something there. Like, we have decided that certain suffering is tolerable. And we've also decided that some suffering is intolerable. And that's
protection mechanisms that we put up for ourselves, right? I mean,
yes. And also, just if you're in power, if you're in the center of things, you can decide that my discomfort is intolerable suffering, but your actual not being able to pay the rent is tolerable to me. and I'm willing to, that's a world I'm willing to live in, but I'm not willing to live in a world where I have to pay more taxes or I have to forgo
Mhm.
some profit. That's a
Mhm.
little example. That's not really what the book's
No, I
talking
hear
about.
you. I hear you.
But yeah, so
Wow.
that's book
Well,
2.
good for you for
Thanks.
tackling, some tough stuff.
Thank you. Like I said, I'm super fun at parties.
So as I mentioned, the title of the book is Bringing Up Kids When the Church Lets You Down, a guide for parents questioning their faith. It's from Erdman's. But I encourage you to go to BekahMcNeel.com and learn more about Bekah and all the wonderful things that she's doing. So Bekah, thanks so much for joining us. I really am so glad that you're doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a great discussion.